Hello, I'm Karen Stanley from Stanley & Partners, letting agents. Welcome to part 2 of a fairer private rental sector white paper review. In the first podcast, we had a look at the first section of the white paper and the abolition of Section 21. Today we'll be looking at mediation services. The government says it wishes to strengthen and embed mediation services to assist landlords and tenants at an earlier stage than at the court door, to make an agreement and, if possible, to prevent evictions without the need to go to court. During the pandemic, we had a 2-year trial of effectively not being able to use Section 21 notice. Given the government's intention, it is quite surprising that they brought the notice period back from 4 months, from the 1st of June 21 to the 30th of September 21, to 2 months currently. During that 2-year period, we found that negotiating with tenants over grievances and rent arrears was the best way forward, and which we have always done. The TDS, the Dispute Service Limited, has already been set up to deal with disagreements during tenancies about property standards, repairs and rent arrears, the idea being that matters can be settled amicably and the tenant can remain in the property if possible. We find that negotiation through an agent has the same effect, as we can advise landlords and tenants of their rights and responsibilities and offer solutions. Quote from the government is as follows: working in partnership with the Ministry of Justice and HM Courts and Tribunal Services, the government says it will also introduce a package of wide-ranging court reforms that will target the areas that particularly frustrate and hold up possession proceedings, including county court bailiff capacity, paper-based processes, a lack of adequate advice about court and tribunal processes, and a lack of prioritisation of cases. So we're looking to see a higher bailiff capacity, online claims, advice at an early stage on the issues, and a prioritisation of cases. The next topic we're going to have a look at is periodic written tenancies with no fixed term. The government's proposed that all tenancy agreements need to be in writing to set out a landlord's and tenant's rights and responsibilities, and can still include special terms. This seems a bit obvious, but by law you can currently create a binding tenancy agreement verbally, which I wouldn't advise you to do. We set out the terms and conditions of a tenancy in writing by way of a tenancy agreement, and we give a fixed term to that tenancy, after which it rolls on either by a statutory periodic tenancy as devised by law, or a contractual periodic tenancy by virtue of the wording of the tenancy agreement. This has added advantage to the landlord, who is secure in knowing his income for the set term and being free from the requirement to pay council tax should the tenant leave without giving the proper notice. The government's proposal is to change the legal structure of a tenancy, outlawing a fixed term and making it a simpler system of only periodic tenancies, which would ordinarily be month to month. Under the proposals, tenancies will continue until either tenants provide 2 months' notice to the landlord to ensure landlords can recoup the costs of finding a tenant and avoid lengthy void periods, or the landlord gives 2 months' notice with a Section 8 reason. The government's idea behind this is to enable tenants to leave poor quality properties without remaining liable for the rent, or to move more easily when their circumstances change, for example, to take up a new job opportunity. Tenants will need to provide 2 months' notice when leaving a tenancy, ensuring landlords recoup the costs of finding a tenant and avoid lengthy void periods. We wait to see if tenants will be forced to give a reason for moving out, just like the landlord has to give a reason for the eviction, as it says if their financial situation changes or the property is not up to standard, as reasons for leaving, but at present it appears not. Those landlords with holiday lets for part of the year will have to decide if they are to let short-term on holiday lets throughout the year or are long-term let landlords, as there are no special provisions for holiday lets. They will not be able to ask their longer-term winter tenant to leave because they wish to let holidaymakers during the summer months, for example. The Scottish private rental sector has already had 10 years of dealing with the introduction of mandatory deposit protection, landlord and agent registration, repairing standards, removal of tenant fees, dedicated housing tribunals, and the private residential tenancy. Since 2017, a new tenancy regime was introduced where there are no minimum terms and only 28 days' notice required by tenants to leave. The majority of time, tenants remain renting for a long time, as who would go all that time and trouble for rigorous referencing if they're not planning to stay long term. The government's proposals in England have increased the notice period to 2 months. Given the much larger rental industry we have here, this will assist landlords in keeping void periods to a minimum. What the legal ramifications are for the total amendment of a contractual agreement will be left to the lawyers, who are no doubt beavering away as we speak on this whole paper. The government was leading think tanks and questionnaires for tenants to have access to long-term tenancies of 3 years or more in recent times. Surely having tenancies where the landlord can give 2 months' notice, albeit with a reason, will prevent that long-term security. The student market is not expected to be exempt either, which again will cause problems and unintended consequences. A well-drafted tenancy agreement, enforcing a landlord's rights to take action against a tenant and reclaim expenses for breach of that tenancy agreement, will be paramount. The importance of the agent will be required for negotiation from the outset to make sure the landlord's and prospective tenants' intentions over the length of rental period are thoroughly discussed and assessed, in addition to the very important question as to their ability to afford to rent the property, not just at the start of the tenancy, but throughout the annual increases. The letting agent will be the landlord's educator throughout, once the new Act comes into force. That concludes part 2 of our podcast, and I'll see you again for part 3. Thank you.